The Russian defense minister has announced the country's air force has begun a large-scale anti-terror combat operation in the Syrian provinces of Homs and Idlib.
For the first time in the history of the military operations of the Russian Navy, an aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, has taken part. Su-33s were also launched from this carrier. Before that, we conducted serious surveillance of all the targets. That's why the main targets have been determined. They're munition warehouses, spots occupied by the militants, to be more precise, terrorists.
Well, we can go live now to Brad Hoff, a US Marine veteran, joining us live to give us some expert insight into what's been going on there on the western coast of Syria with the next phase of that operation. Thanks for joining us live today, Brad. Just to lay people who perhaps aren't so knowledgeable on military tactics, what's the actual advantage of having this aircraft carrier there? It's travelled so far all the way from northern Russia. What does it add to this operation?
Well, of course, it adds major, overwhelming airstrikes to support military movements on the ground. Of course, in 2003, with the invasion of Iraq, the Bush White House called this tactic shock and awe. But of course, this is a very different kind of situation where I see Russia's entry into the theater as initially more defensive. But at this point, obviously, there are people saying it's time to end this war. And I think you actually have a quiet nod coming from the Obama White House, who's, of course, finishing his term. He's on his last trip to Europe as we speak. I doubt that any of this would be happening now without some kind of U.S.-Russian military-to-military communication.
And speaking of that timing, you mentioned, of course, last week, the U.S. President, or outgoing U.S. President Barack Obama, ordered that all that al-Nusra terrorists can now be targeted. He made that decision after the election of Trump. There's been no decisive action yet so far, though, from the U.S.-led coalition. Do you think that's likely to happen anytime soon?
I do not. I actually think the decisive action is simply to look the other way as Russia escalates its operations. Of course, the fact that there's a Russian carrier in the Mediterranean was no secret to anyone. The fact that it's parked where it is, I think, was definitely allowed by the Western coalition. I think the West is unwilling to wrap up this destabilizing war. Obama's policy has been seen as sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, just preferring covert operations. And it appears that those who argued that covert operations in Syria, such as CIA regime change, as well as the Pentagon's train and equip program, I think the voices that said that was a complete disaster and has only added to the destabilization of the region have won out.
Let's just look a bit more at the timing of this. Obviously, Obama's announcement, as we mentioned earlier, came a day after Donald Trump was elected. On Tuesday, Trump and Putin discussed the crisis in Syria, their first telephone conversation. And today, the operation started. Do you see any coincidence in these series of events, or do you think there's some pattern here?
I think there's no coincidence, and actually we should look at this from more of a Russian, Syrian, Iranian strategic perspective. The media has not been kind to Syria or Russia, obviously. And of course, in the West right now, in the United States especially, you turn on TV, you get in your car in the morning and listen to national public radio. The only news on is about Trump and about the impact of Trump's domestic policies and about the future of the United States. Right now, nobody is tuned in to news of Aleppo or Idlib or these new Russian strikes. In fact, I got in my car this morning and didn't hear a word about it, and yet it's really the biggest news in the last many years of this whole Syria catastrophe. So certainly the timing of this is very important. Really nothing this big happens by accident. And certainly the Russians and Syrians know that because of the election, nobody is tuned in to what's going on in terms of events on the ground. So no, this is definitely willful, and I think even the Western side benefits by the fact that everyone's distracted with the election right now, because of course there's going to be a lot of pressure put on the U.S. administration, which is just a lame duck presidency, to do something. And of course, there are already British officials in Washington, D.C. right now reaching out to Team Trump, trying to convince him to have a policy of escalation in Syria. Of course, we can imagine there's probably also Syrian and Russian intermediaries in D.C. right now arguing just the opposite. It's a kind of scramble right now to influence the next administration. Obama's not going to do anything. He's not going to risk his Nobel Prize legacy escalating in the last month of his presidency, where he'll be remembered as the president that potentially started World War III.
Okay, Brad Hoff, US Marine veteran, thanks for joining us, giving us your expert insight into that ongoing operation in Western Syria.
Thank you.
Well, we can go live now to our correspondent Murat Gaziev. He's actually on the ground in Syria. Can trust him for some more insight into what's going on. Murat, it's perhaps no surprise that this latest phase has started now, this Navy-based operation. What details do we know so far, though?
Well, strikes began just after midday. They're hitting Idlib province, which is the capital of Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda in Syria. They're hitting Homs, Hama, other terrorist groups, from where they have launched attacks, numerous attacks on Aleppo and other areas in Syria. The strikes have apparently started off with cruise missile launches from the Russian naval battle group stationed just off of Syria's coast. Of course, for the first time ever in its long service life, the aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov has joined in on the military operation. This is its first real military operation. Su-33 aircraft are already carrying out airstrikes against terrorist targets, and they're going for munition depots, they're going for munition factories, they're going for logistics centers, for headquarters, for training camps. And there'd been a lot of speculation in the past weeks about why there are so many Russian jets apparently flying with their weapons pods empty, so many drones. Now we know why they were flying all over Syria. They were gathering intelligence. This operation had been a long time in the coming. They had put a lot of effort into compiling these lists of targets, and now they're looking to take them out in one ferocious campaign. Of course, a priority here is to neutralize the terrorists' capacity to construct, to build, and utilize weapons of mass destruction. Over the last week, there have been 2 incidents of the use, apparently, of chlorine gas in and around Aleppo. 60 people, as well as civilians, soldiers, injured in those attacks. Many people killed. They want to end the terrorists' capacity to use those weapons. Russian nuclear, chemical, biological protection teams are on the ground. They're monitoring the situation, ready to respond where the need arises. Of course, this has all been coordinated with Syrian troops, ground forces, their allies on the ground, and they're making their own advances.
All right, Murat, there, bring us the latest on that operation. Murat Gaziev live on the ground in Syria.